Hello everyone and welcome to the Quiet Run channel. I'm Ala, and in this video I'd love to talk a little bit about and this is my dog Baxter. In this video I'd love to talk to you about sort of summary of what we discussed previously in the nasal breathing myth posts videos. If you haven't watched them yet, I'll link them down below. In this video, I just want to sort of summarize of our learnings and limitations and what to sort of think about when we as athletes and runners think about nasal breathing. So what we learned from the previous myth videos about nasal breathing is that, number one, we need carbon dioxide to deliver oxygen to our tissues. Number two is that nasal breathing can reduce the work of breathing. And number three, breathing frequency is driven by non-metabolic inputs. Now, let's elaborate a little bit more on the limitations of nasal and mouth breathing. So I'd like to say, first of all, nasal breathing does not necessarily giving you a clear athletic performance. And by athletic performance, I mean, for example, running a faster marathon. So if you're switching from mouth to nose breathing, you are not going to become a faster marathoner. You're not going to run a marathon from 3 hours, 30 minutes to a sub 3 hours marathon. Nasal breathing is not going to make you a fast runner. Now, there is research that shows that there is no benefit of nasal breathing, and there is also research that shows that there are benefits of nasal breathing. Research that shows that there are benefits to nasal breathing accounts for the adaptation phase of nasal breathing. And that makes sense because imagine you are a mouth breather during your endurance training, and someone asks you to switch to nasal breathing. You won't be seeing benefits of it because you need to adapt to nasal breathing. And so research that accounts the adaptation phase does see a 22% reduction in respiratory rate. So the work of breathing is reduced. The fact that we are seeing a respiratory rate reduction doesn't mean that somebody is going to be a faster runner. It is showing that we are doing less work with our breathing at the same output. So now think about athletic performance from a different lens. Think about athletic performance from a lens of an ultramarathoner or any other athlete whose athletic performance is not to finish fast, but maybe to finish within a certain days, right? If you run 100-mile or 200-mile events, now imagine you are running and using your nasal breathing, and you are adapted to that, you will definitely see benefits in terms of respiratory muscle fatigue. It will onset slower than if you were breathing through your mouth. So especially for ultra runners, we see really good benefits with nasal breathing. Now, another thing to think about athletic performance is longevity. We all want to run longer. We all want to run when we are 60 and 70 and 80 and just enjoy the movement, enjoy the nature outside. So for that goal of athletic performance, not necessarily the speed and all that, but the longevity, that's when the nasal breathing will help you. With nasal breathing, according to research, we're also seeing a lower RPE, rate of perceived exhaustion. So it is easier, but the same outcome it feels easier when we run using our nose. Now, the second thing that I'd like to emphasize is that carbon dioxide is a gas, and with adequate amount, it does help us deliver oxygen to our tissues. That's called Bohr effect, and that's what you learned in one of the myths. Now, because it's still a waste gas, it with inadequate amounts, it can be toxic for our body. And the most efficient way to offload CO2 from your body is using your mouth because there is more space. So when you train in a low aerobic activity, using your nose is super beneficial to train that energy system where you utilize fats for fuel. And once you start getting into more like aerobic and especially anaerobic efforts, that's when your not the carbohydrate, carbon dioxide levels will rise, and you will need to offload them, offload the carbon dioxide using your mouth. And that's when you need to open your mouth and utilize it. It is not nose way or highway. So it's not about whether we should be opening our mouth, but rather when should we open our mouth when we exercise. So if you run most of your runs at a zone 2 level, at a low aerobic threshold level, using your nose would be absolutely beneficial at that zone. And if you think about kind of pushing that limit of your nose when you keep your mouth shut, and when you start getting into that more intense workouts, maybe aerobic threshold work, VO2 max work, and then open your mouth, that's where we see most kind of training in different energy systems with nasal and mouth breathing. And that's where Shift Adopt's gear system is absolutely beneficial. And I will link the gear shifting system down below. Gear shifting system is pretty much 4 gears. The first one, inhaling and exhaling through the nose. The second one would be inhaling and exhaling through the nose, but more forced. And the third one would be inhaling and exhaling inhaling on the nose and exhaling through the mouth. And the fourth one, in through your mouth and out through your mouth. So if you can imagine you're running a marathon and you trained yourself in that nasal capacity for a very long time. So you say you open your mouth at a VO2 max work, like you half of your race, you will be working of your work of breathing will be lower because you're going to be using your nose. And then in the second half, you will be opening up that mouth and your work of breathing will be higher, but you're not going to be utilizing your mouth the entire time, fatiguing yourself and not being able to finish faster. So that's where we see the most benefits with nasal and mouth breathing. And I'd like to add that respiratory science evolves constantly, and we are just scratching the surface with all the research studies that we are seeing now. And there is no systematic review that had happened yet in a space of nasal and mouth breathing with endurance training. There is some of the research is really lacking adaptation phase as the prerequisite for that type of research, and we are still yet to see a systematic review and more studies, adequate studies that account for the adaptation phase. Thank you for watching, and I hope this helps you to really implement this knowledge in your training, knowing that we need our nose for specific energy system training. We use our mouth for a specific energy system as well, and both have a lot of benefits. It's not nose way or highway. Don't be stuck on that. And yeah, thanks for watching.